welcome back to the Millionaire Choice Show. Today on the show, I have with me Andy Bailey. He is the founder, president, owner of Petra Coach. And man, Andy has a wealth of knowledge in the small business space, He does coaching. He's the author of the book, No Try and Vitamin B for Business. Welcome to the show, Andy. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. I'm excited to be here.
Man, I think we knew each other, started getting to know each other about 6 years ago when I was with the Ramsey organization, and we were starting to do a lot of strategic planning. And I started learning about Vern's material, and that's really your specialty. You help businesses today kind of transcend where they're at and kind of get a good strategy and vision. Why don't you explain for the audience what your insights are and what you actually do today?
Well, what we do today, being 9 days into June, is very different than what we did before March the 13th, which happened to be Friday the 13th. But traditionally what we do is help businesses scale. So, you're here, you want to be there, wherever there may be, it's getting the business from 2 million to 20 million or million to whatever in the future, and building strategic plans in order to achieve those, and then holding people accountable to those plans through a very systematic approach. I'm a big believer in systems. I showed you my calendar and how I track my own personal stuff a little while ago. And I just know that stuff works. It worked for me in my first company that I had. And it works when we're helping these other organizations do. Now, recently, Tony, we've been working a lot to help businesses survive, and then get back to thriving on the other side of this. So our business models changed quite a bit, not to mention having to be virtual, just like everybody else.
Yeah, I'd seen a number the other day. I saw some speculation that we were going to hit like 24% unemployment, and the numbers I saw the other day were that we were right around 13.3%, but that we had like 2.5 million jobs created or hired, coming off the back end of this coronavirus. Is that what you're seeing kind of in the small business sector?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is we've been exposed to a ton of new companies since coronavirus started. We had a following of around, 18,000 or so people that were subscribed to our material and showing up for our stuff prior to coronavirus, and we're eclipsing 50,000 at this point. So we're, not only getting a lot of new exposure, but we're learning a lot from the marketplace as well. And one of the things we're learning is these companies that had, very systematic ways of making decisions, and that's some of the work that we were doing with them prior to COVID-19, versus the ones that did not have very systematic ways of making decisions, are not faring as well as the ones that did have a system for making those decisions. What I mean by that is, even though the plans that we had set for people out into the future, which is how you make decisions today, this is where I am, where I want to go, and what I need to do today to get there. Even though it shifted, they still had a platform for making those shifts, where most people were just kind of paralyzed with it. Although, I do see that business is picking up. Our own business has picked up tremendously in the last, call it 3 to 4 weeks. And we see some really big upticks on the horizon.
Yeah, and I think what you make a good point there, what comes to mind is companies that are adaptable, that aren't kind of locked into their own way of doing things. They have like a method or a system to assess and, pivot when they need to, like a coronavirus, versus being stuck just trying to figure out, doing business as usual and not being to get unstuck from that.
Yeah, and it's, I have this, it's hard, I won't be able to see this on a podcast, but I got a sticker on my desk that says return to better. And every time somebody on a call or whatever says, I'm waiting for the return, I'm like, look, the return probably ain't coming. So you need to be thinking about what's the return to better, and better may be completely different. I did a webinar 2 weeks ago with about 25 live event promoters. Now think about that. Live event promoters. Half of the room, half of that screen was really engaged in what I was talking about. Like, how do I reinvent myself in this new world where live events aren't going to be happening for the foreseeable future? And the other half were like stuck in this, hey man, the government's not doing enough. They're not giving us enough information. They're not telling us what we can go do and what we can't do. And like, look, the half over here that's making decisions and moving things forward and picking a point in the future and putting plans together are the ones that are going to thrive right now. The rest of you guys might not make it. I mean, things have to change. We're not going back to doing business the way we used to do business.
Yeah, that reminds me of a book out there called Who Moved My Cheese. Have you read that one? You've got so many books on your shelf behind you.
Yeah, I'm sure it's back here somewhere. Little tiny, lot of pictures. I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I read that probably close to 15 years ago, and it's exactly what you're talking about. Is when the cheese gets moved, where you're going to find it. You got to go find it somewhere else because it's not business as usual. So now you shared with me a wonderful story, and I love the story because it's very unusual for somebody in college to do what you did. And I think the beauty of that is when I think about my own life, and I got out of college and I was working as an engineer, and I was pretty successful by most people's standards. I was making $39,000 a year. And I was excited because I was making more money than my mom was making. And she had been in the workforce for 20 plus years. And I'm like, hey, I'm feeling pretty good here. I'm out earning my parents, got my college degree. But I never really understood the fact that my income was only limited by my mindset. And that didn't happen to me for a few years after that. Probably it was at least another 5 or 6 years before my mindset about my income started to shift. But share your story, your college story with the audience. And that kind of took you into the telecommunications industry, which is one of your first big businesses.
Yeah. So, I'll touch on that mindset piece a little bit too. One of the things that I do, and I'll do it in July as well, is I do what's called 14ers, which is mountains that are 14,000 feet are called 14ers. There's 53 of them in the state of Colorado, and myself and some friends go out every July, and we'll do 2 to 5 over a week-long period. And these things are like, some of them are class 1, class 2, pretty easy. They're just like a big long walk, 12-hour walk. And some of them are like class 4, class 5, which is really, really arduous and very, very difficult. And the mindset piece of that, and I tie this back to business when I do some webinars, is until you go do those really hard things, like climbing a class 4 14er, you don't really think you can actually do it. That's the mind shift, right? So once you kind of achieve that level, my dad said to me one time, once you make $100,000 a year, you'll never make less than $100,000 a year. And I was like, what the hell are you talking about? But that's true. Once you know that you can do that, you have the ability to repeat that performance again and again. Once you eclipse the next level, you have the ability to repeat that performance again and again. So in college, I was not a good student. So to be clear, you said, early on when you're in college, I went to college the first year and they didn't invite me back after the first year. And yeah, I had a 0.67 GPA. They're like, hey, I don't think you're really ready for this. So I was not invited to return. And I went to work in the construction business and, middle of the Tennessee sun and, a bunch of very, very hard labor work for about 3 years. And then I decided I was going to go back. Once I went back, still didn't get as serious about college. Never was much for authority anyway. But I had a guy call me and say, hey, I hear you're pretty good at sales. I would love to talk to you about doing some sales for us. So he asked me to meet him at Hardee's of all places. And I got all dressed up thinking, it's a job interview. Never really had a job interview. So I went in and sat down at Hardee's, and there comes this guy with his SAE t-shirt on, a pair of cutoff chinos, and he sits down with his flip-flops and he starts talking about selling, cell phones. Back in the day, cell phones were very expensive, $500, $600, $1,000. They came in a bag. I mean, these things they didn't work half the time. If you went outside of the city limits, you couldn't get a signal. It was all those kind of scary stuff. But I said, yeah, man, I'll do that. And it paid really well. It was paying us, and we were all 1099 contractors. So, what risk did they have of hiring us? So it was about $250 we made for every single line we turned on. And, I just kind of hit the streets, and I would do things like set up at a fair on the weekends and talk to people at a booth and just do kind of oddball things to sell these. But I generated a pretty good income, over 6 figures while I was still in college, and learned a lot through that process. One of the things I learned was I know my own tendencies when it comes to generating income. And one of them is if I know it's all up to me and my money, and that in that regard. It was, if I didn't go sell cell phones, I wasn't making any money. The inverse of that is, if I went to the lake for the weekend with my friends, I wasn't making any money. So I never did anything. I was trading time for money, and every minute meant money to me. And I just learned that about myself pretty quickly. So the first lesson, and I talk about this in the book, No Try, Only Do, is figuring out how to have a recurring revenue business, whatever that kind of business is. Ever since then, once I started my first company, which was in the beeper or pager space, ever since then, every single thing I've ever done has a recurring revenue component, if not 100% recurring revenue.
Yeah. Now, what was interesting in that journey of your life, you were very successful in the sales business, but you actually cracked the $100,000 annual income year while you were a senior in college.
Yeah. And that was interesting. It was good and interesting, because there is not a senior in college that should make that much money. That's, I bought my first house when I was in college. I bought, boats and jet skis and, nice stuff. I spent it all. I didn't keep any of it. But, that's not something that, if looking back on it, it was good. I mean, it was cool, but it certainly wasn't something I should have been doing.
Yeah. And so I believe you shared with me, you had a coffee cup that kind of sat next to your, was your bed. Yeah. And what'd you keep in that coffee cup?
Checks. I didn't have any need. I mean, what are you going to do with all that money? You're a college student. So I would get checks for commission checks, and I just fold them up, put them in a coffee cup sitting on the counter in the bedroom. And there would be like 2 months worth of checks in there, $40,000 or something, just kind of sitting in the coffee cup waiting to be deposited, because I didn't have time to go to the bank. Because I went to the bank, I wasn't making money, right? It was, it's a trade-off.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of lessons to come out of that, man, because it sounds like you had a really strong work ethic. So even though you ran off and did the construction thing for a while, you probably picked a lot of strong work ethic up out of that, and then converted that into sales, something you obviously were naturally good at. And then broke through that $100,000 barrier, at that, what, 2021, 22 years old?
It was probably 24 at that time.
24. Yeah. Cause you stopped for 3 years and then went back. Yeah. And then got into your business, which was telecommunications, and sold that. You said, you let me know you sold that and then had to pick it back up. What happened there?
Yeah, we sold that business twice. I say that, and I have the opportunity to, when we could do live speaking, I speak at MIT, and I do a little bit of stuff at Harvard, which is awesome to go do. And I speak to entrepreneurs a lot, and I'm like, can anybody ever sold the same business twice in the room? And I've never found anybody that sold the same business twice. Well, mine was not a great story, but I started in 1993. The company is called NationLink Wireless, or NationLink Paging back then. And I sold it for the last time in 2011. Well, around 1999, we had an offer to purchase the company. We were very heavy in pagers at that time. We were just kind of dripping into the cell phone space a bit. And we had 30,000 or so pagers online. So it was a decent little business. I don't remember what it was, $5-6 million in recurring revenue, which is a good little company at that size. And we had an offer from a group who was rolling up essentially pager systems. So the towers and the infrastructure, and the towers and the infrastructure people traditionally don't have a lot of sales and marketing skills. Well, we didn't own any towers or infrastructure. We bought that on a regular basis. That's the piece that we subscribed to. And then we were really good at sales and marketing, putting stuff on the street, getting people to buy it, doing all the, collections and managing the clients and doing all that stuff. So when they approached me, it was like, yeah, this is a no-brainer. We spend $500,000 a year in airtime. That would go away. So there's at least $500,000 we gain back, and we'll have this kind of infrastructure that'll be part of this overall organization. And in 1999, it was a good year. So there was a lot of money out in the marketplace to go do these acquisitions, and they were going to do 6 of them around from Kentucky down through Mississippi and Georgia and into Florida. Tower acquisitions, tower companies. We just happened to be the one non-tower company. It came to us first. We agreed first. We actually agreed to a point, and sometimes this is embarrassing to admit, agreed to a point of allowing them to use our name for the new business. And I went on the road and did the road shows, helping them close these other businesses. So I would go, and ours didn't close yet. Keep that in mind. We hadn't closed on the sale of our business yet. So we went to Kentucky and we closed the one in Kentucky. We did another road show and we raised some more money. And this entire time, this new guy, CEO guy, is telling me, our deal's going to close, our deal's going to close, our deal's going to close. And then the .com bubble hit. Money started drying up. Access to credit got really tight. And I started getting a little bit nervous, but I was so far into this already. They're using my name. We actually had started an ISP, if you remember modems and racks back in the day. We'd started an ISP under that name. There's a lot of stuff really ingrained in this thing. So when it came time for us to close, they called and said, hey, we don't have the funds to pay you, even with the terms, to pay you for the business. So we want to do it on a note. We want to do a notes payable to you, and we'll pay it. First payment's due in 6 months. First payment's due in 90 days. If there's not a payment made, there's a cure period of 3 more months. So it's basically a 6-month window. Well, in that 6 month, we closed. We had a notes payable, notes supposed to be payable in 90 days, and they missed the first payment. And I'm telling you, in that 6 month period of time, that business shifted like crazy. 2 days after the 90 days was over, they came into our offices and removed all of our files and our ability to access the bank accounts, stop paying payroll. It got really bad, really fast. And I knew, hey, something's going on here. Literally, Tony, ended up, fast forward a couple months later, we were trying to figure out what to do. I pulled my leadership team together. We sat in the living room and I said, this is what we can do. We can take this route where we can all walk out tomorrow, start with zero, and do this again. We know how to do it. I've got us an office space downtown. A buddy of mine was going to let me use some space. Or I can go talk to, this jabberhead and figure out if we can get this company back. And we made this choice between the known, which was get the company back, and the unknown, which was start anew. And we said, well, we know this. Vendors were calling me like crazy. So those are your friends. You've built those relationships over a decade. You don't want to screw them. So we went back to the known. I literally sat with a guy in Cracker Barrel and unwound the deal. I took back about $1.5 million in debt that I didn't have when we sold the business. So when I took it back in 2000, I took it back and with more debt than it had when I sold it, and with zero idea of how I was going to repair it and get it back to shape. And that was one of the scariest times of my life. My wife probably didn't sleep for 2 years because house had to be mortgaged to pay bill. Like it got really, really tight, really, really fast. But back to the work ethic thing, and it was just like for 2 years, grinding and grinding and grinding to get that business back. The lesson I learned in that, and it kind of goes with the show, was I had always thought, and I think entrepreneurs in general do this, always thought that I'm just going to pour everything into the company and keep building the company. One day somebody's going to write a big fat check for this and I'm going to be rich. Like that's how the world's supposed to work. Well, I got to sell in the business and I sold it. I didn't get paid for it. I got, hosed in the deal and I had to start over. So my moment of what should have been payday turned into debt day. And that start over led me down this thinking of, rather than counting on my business to be my payday, I'm going to use my business to build wealth as I go. And I spent the next decade from 2000 to 2011, and which is when we sold it the second time, doing exactly that. I got it back on pace, started doing really, really well. We started implementing the Rockefeller Habits and doing the work that you and I talked about earlier. And it became highly profitable, which allowed me to build wealth before it was time to sell it again. So I didn't care as much about the sale the second time, and because I didn't have to.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of great principles there. One, you had a plan for your future, which is, hey, I'm going to keep working in my business, but I'm also going to diversify, whether that was in, real estate or, stocks and bonds or whatever you went into. That way you had something to fall back on, multiple streams, if you will. And I think that's powerful. and just doing it over time, the long haul, and having that vision. The other thing, I think, when you threw out that $1.5 million in debt, I bet a bunch of the listeners were like, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine. I'm only $30,000 in debt. And how did that psychologically affect you? Because a lot of times everybody's got a number and they feel like their debt number is overwhelming, no matter where it's at, whether it's 20 grand, 100 grand, or, a couple hundred grand. But psychologically, how did that feel to you?
Like I said, my wife didn't sleep for 2 years, but for me, it wasn't that great. I mean, it didn't bother me all that much. There's a piece of that story where when we took it back, I sat with the principal at the bank and said, look, this is I'm going to be on the note. We take back this debt. Just understand that there's no way we're going to be able to cover covenants right out of the gate. And he's like, I got you. Don't worry. So we do all the notes and all that stuff. And within 2 months, this character has left the bank. So he's gone. Now, he knew he was trying to get it all cleaned up before he left and know what was happening. And I had, I was then put into special assets at the bank, which means I had a special assets person who did not know who I was, visiting my office and reviewing everything on a monthly basis. So it wasn't just about being in debt. It was about being in special assets at the bank and, basically in trouble for something that I didn't create. But it was mine to deal with. I accepted the responsibility when I made the decision to make that turn. And once I accepted the responsibility, I just had to fight through it. And I always knew personally that, nothing's insurmountable. It was just going to take me a matter of time.
Yeah, I agree. And wow. Yeah, I've not the most debt I've ever had. Well, I guess I had my house, which we paid off. But as a young guy, it was like, I was about 20 grand in debt, or 16 grand in debt. And then my wife got married. My wife brought me another 20 grand in debt. I was all cleaned up, and then she came along. But let's explore the Rockefeller habits for a minute, because, obviously those apply in business, but I think a lot of times you look at the successful habits that you would form anywhere, whether that's in business, but those transfer over to your personal life. And if you want to be able to build wealth, you have to be able to form good habits, not only in your life, but if you're in business, you need to do that as well. And so let's talk about some of the Rockefeller habits that you're out there teaching and implementing for these businesses to be successful.
Yeah. So you got to, the first thing is understand where you are, right? So be very, very clear with where you are. So from a business perspective, it's, what is our culture like? What is our financial situation? What do we have and what do we not have? And we built a 10-point checklist for this. It's fairly simple. You fill it out and you get a good understanding from a ranking perspective where you are. What are your meeting rhythms like? What are the relationships inside of the executive team? There's a lot to it. Then you start looking out and say, where do we want to go? What does my 3-year horizon look like? What does my 5-year horizon look like? And being as detailed as humanly possible in predicting that, even though you have no real idea of how you're going to get there, is really, really key. The clearer you can get on what that looks like in its end state, it allows you to put plans together to get there. And then backing that up to, what does it look like in a year? What does it look like in a quarter? What does it look like in a month? What does it look like in a week? And what do I need to be doing today? This is your habitual piece. What do I need to do today in order to end up in that place in 5 years? So those small little incremental habitual changes that you can make are the ones that lead and build up to something long-term. We call ourselves personal trainers for business. I mean, it's the exact same thing as if you want to run a marathon and you've never run before, you're not just going to get up and go run a marathon unless you want to hurt for 3 weeks after. You got to start with a little bit of a training plan, and you got to do something on a regular basis. The same thing is true with building wealth. You don't just take big chunks of money. Like I was betting on my company to take a big chunk of money and put in the bank. It's a little easier to do it if you know that you can build it up a little bit over time and watch that stuff compound, which you can't.
Yeah. And I guess the best way to say that, and the principle there, is you just have to learn to stack up good habits. And so, unfortunately, a lot of us as Americans have stacked up a lot of bad habits. And then we wake up one day and go, how did I get here? Well, it's because you stacked up bad habits one on top of each other, whether that was, spending your money at the movies or, frivolous things, buying the new TV every time it comes out, upsizing everything, eating out. Oh my gosh. Like it cost me probably anywhere from $60 to $100 to feed my family out. I've got 6 kids. And every time I go out and look at the check, I'm like, man, I can feed my kids at home, I know, for $15. And, I do it all the time. And then, but it's a habit, a balancing act, and go, hey, I could put this money in a better place. The one that always comes up, of course, is Starbucks, the Starbucks addicts out there, and how much money you actually spend.
I think it's a bit biological too. So if you think about the human body, the human being, right? Our bodies and our brains are built for comfort. Like, that's how we've evolved. We've evolved by chasing comfort, not chasing discomfort. Every single cell in our body, the minute it gets super cold and we become getting a little bit uncomfortable, we chase heat. If it's too hot, we chase cold. We're built for comfort. We want to chase that. So you got to fight that urge. Big TVs, eating out's easier than cooking. All that shit is just comfort. If you just get away from comfort and chase discomfort and think about, I don't really want to go do that. Well, that's probably what you shouldn't be doing. Just go do that. I mean, that's kind of the simple answer.
Yeah, and that's really a lot of good wisdom in what you were saying there. I've never really heard it put that way, but you're exactly right. It's chasing the comfort, the things that make us feel good. And, saving your money versus spending it doesn't necessarily feel good. Investing it, or even learning, you have a wonderful library behind you today. And a lot of people don't put the time in and effort to actually make themselves more intelligent and apply their skill, which would be a good habit, And I think that's a good point. You mentioned earlier to me that you have a pretty disciplined reading regimen. What does that look like?
10 minutes a day. So, I mean, the regimen is 10 minutes a day. And sometimes 10 minutes turns into 30. Sometimes 10 minutes is only 10 minutes. But if I build the habit on 10 minutes per day, then I'll pick up 30 to 50 books a year. No, there's days I'll sit out by the pool and I'll read an entire book. Or last week I was down in Florida at the beach, and I'll read 2 or 3 while I'm down there. But I have to, based on what I've told myself I'm going to do, check it off on the box every single day to just read 10 minutes. And anybody can read 10. If you can't read 10, read 2. Just do 2. If you can't do 15 push-ups, just do 1. The act of opening the book to turn to the page is the hard part. The heaviest weight in the gym is the front door, right? Doing push-ups is not the problem. Getting in the floor to do the push-ups is the problem. So little like micro habits will begin to build on bigger things.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I think people want to say, hey, I want to be successful, but they don't want to do the hard work, the millions of little steps that you have to do to get there. And so how many books did you read last year, Andy?
Last year, I think it was like 46 or 48. I have to look
so
back.
Almost one a week.
Yeah, about 1 a week.
Yeah. Wow. That just blows my mind. I think the most I've ever read in a year, I'm telling on myself a little bit here, but I aspire to be Andy Bailey right now. So I think the most I've ever read in a year might be between 12 and 15. And I need to improve that quite a bit. I've got a big library, but it's a lot of unread books.
It all starts though, and I showed you this tracker thing, right? So it looks kind of arduous and there's a lot of information. I got a stack of them over here behind me. They go back about 8 years. And if I look back 8 years ago, I mean, it was 12 or 15. So, I had 3 things per day I was doing. Now I have 9 things per day. There was so many, everything was smaller. And I look back on it and go, wow, I didn't get much done back then, but it was a starting point to build on. And year over year, I'm able to expand upon it. What I found was by using a system, no different than Rockefeller Habits for Business, using a system and following a system allowed me to gain additional, like exponentially every year, get bigger and better and bigger and better.
Yeah, just kind of build. And so if you were to sit down with somebody today and give them a little bit of coaching and saying, hey, let's get your life on the right path. You want to be successful. Let's get you started. I'm not going to give you the 10 things to do, but I'm going to give you the 1, 2, or 3 things to do. What are those 3 things going to be?
Yeah, I actually teach a class on this actually. Used to have people fly in. They'd fly in and spend 2 days with me, and we would take them through the entire process.
A little pre-coronavirus model.
Exactly. And I'm working on because there's a lot of materials that goes along with it. So I'm working on how do we do it. But the first thing is you need to get really clear on where you are. And we call it the 6 F's. So friends, family, faith. There's like a wheel of life, if you're familiar with that. But in each of these areas, where are you right now? How satisfied are you on a scale of 0 to 10? If you want, I'm happy to do it. I can share the material if you want to share it. Anybody's welcome to use it. So understanding clearly where you are would be step one. And then looking out and saying, in my life, this is what I want to be true. If I'm looking at myself personally, I'm going to go out at least 20 years. In business, we go out 3 to 5. We actually go out to 30, but we come back to 3 to 5. In my life, what I want to be true. So you got to take a date in the future. It's got to be at least 20 years out. Some people say legacy. What is it like after I'm no longer here? And you define that into these separate categories. What are my relationships like? What are my achievements like? What are my rituals like? And then what is my wealth, which is actually a column. What is my wealth like? What does it look like? And as clear a picture as you can possibly write it. And then from there, we back it back down to this year. What has to happen this year? So 3 things would be: figure out exactly where you are now. Look out as far as you possibly can, minimum of 20 years, and do your best to design what you want your life to look like. And then back it up and say, what are the 12 things I need to achieve by the end of the year 2020 in order to start marching towards that particular point.
Yeah. And I think that's clarity. And I think what resonates with me with that is a lot of people are just drifting. They just you fall into these habits, whether you're taught them by your parents or you grow up with them, but you kind of just keep drifting in the same cycle year in and year out. And what you're really talking about is creating a vision for where you really want your life to be. And very few people actually, I don't want to say very few people, because a lot of people do have their own vision, but there's a much bigger group of people that don't have a vision for their life. And you're really talking about grabbing hold of that vision and then figuring out how to achieve it and get there.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like you do it by design instead of by default. Because, we only get to do this one time. I mean, you might as well figure out exactly what you want it to look like and quit being disappointed in everything that happens. It's not 100%. The road is hard. I mean, it's a hell of a lot harder to design it than it is to go by default. But you can achieve a lot more if you design it and you get on the path from that perspective.
Yeah, you got my gears turning quite a bit right now. Thinking about my 6 kids, I'm kind of trying to figure out how to transfer all of those guys. My oldest is off in college this year. He's going to be an architect. But just realizing the things that I need to transfer him, knowing that, I'm pushing 50 this year, and the things it's taken me that long to learn and how to, fast track him on that. So, Andy, how will people get in touch with you and learn a little bit more about what you're doing and get a hold of these principles that you're helping people with?
PetraCoach.com, PetraCoach.com. That's the business website. You're more than welcome to email me, Andy@PetraCoach.com. I can send you those tools and you can share them. They're not, I don't think they're available directly on the website for download, but if you send me an email, I'm happy to share any of those things with you. Yeah,
and they can pick your book up both of your books up through PetraCoach.com is the best place to get those. No Try and Vitamin B for Business.
Yeah, so I make about $10 more for every one of them that is sold on that website as opposed to Amazon. You're welcome to buy it on Amazon. I would prefer if you bought it, because the books cost about $50,000 just to get 3,000 copies of them in-house. So my goal is always cover the costs. I'm not looking to make money, just cover the cost of the books.
Yeah, Amazon doesn't really share a lot of the wealth.
They got a really good business model.
Yes, they do. Well, Andy, I really appreciate your time. Thanks for carving out some of your busy day for us, and I look forward to meeting up with you in the future.
All right, really good to see you.
Bye-bye.
The Millionaire Choice Show shares the opinions and experiences of people and should not be considered financial advice. Before making your own financial choices, please seek out a registered financial advisor or certified financial planner.